Hello, everybody. It's Miguel, and today is the 3rd of November, 2023. All right, well, let's see. So as you know, we've been going through art quotations and explaining and describing their meaning. So let's move on to the very next quotation. Well, the next quotation is a very short one. It is a quotation by Mr. W. Eugene Smith. And W. Eugene Smith was born in 1918 and died in 1978. And his quote is as follows: "Hardening of the categories causes art disease." Oh, that's a jolly good quote right there. So this is a play on words. Normally, one would read this and it would say something like this. It would say, hardening of the arteries causes heart disease. Now, many of you are aware that heart disease is the number one killer in the United States. And interestingly, hardening of the categories, I think, is also one of the greatest killers in the United States, at least for mental health, certainly, and possibly, very likely, for art as well. So let's think about what Mr. Eugene Smith, or Mr. Smith, is trying to say here. Hardening of the categories causes art disease. Now, yeah, we've been talking, in fact, over the last few days about art and categorization and how it has a limiting impact on... well, you know what? Let me take that back. It's not categorization. It's inflexible, fixed, rigid categorization. And it's not even that. It's more about expectations. It's more about maybe a subgroup's expectations and sort of like a disconnection from the inner self happening as a result. Because theoretically, just categorizing lots of things, and even using hard categories for categorizing things, it's not that problematic. Because all that is just a labeling. It's sort of a labeling activity. And here's the thing. The human brain loves to label. We love to generalize because we are conceptual creatures. Our mind our rational faculty functions on concepts. And what is a concept anyway? But a concept, it's a kind of generalization where we throw a lot of concretes under a certain abstract concept. And that's how we do our thinking. 1 + 1 = 2 is a great example. And it's part of what makes human beings the rational animal, right? So, and it's important for us to be able to label stuff. We must label stuff so that we can understand stuff. At least get a little bit closer to understanding things. I mean, that's how we grasp the world around us, is through concepts and labeling those things. So that's just part of what it is to be human and to think and to be effective in the world, right? And here's the thing. I know there's like, I'm reading the quotation literally. Hardening of the categories causes art disease. Art disease. I mean, but there's a deeper intent behind the statement, right? It's not about. I mean, Mr. Smith is not talking about labeling, even though it appears as though he is. And of course, he's certainly making a joke about it. But beyond the joke, and beyond just the sort of the text, I'm interested in the intent. What is Mr. Smith really talking about? Um, and it's more than just hardening of the categories, right? Having fixed, rigid, but I think, but along with this fixed rigidity, right? There's something else, uh, in fixed rigidity of the categories, which to me doesn't seem like such a problem. I mean, you could really specify what country music is, and you can just, drill down. But you also have to be flexible. Like, oh, this is a country music derivative. It's slightly off, slightly different, right? And then that's totally okay, right? I think that's generally okay. But a problem arises, right? And there's a natural tendency, and it unfolds naturally, right? When something can go haywire, right? Now I just called it the word expectations. I wonder if that's, I don't think that tells the whole story. But the whole story is not told by expectations. And you know what? The whole story is not necessarily told by desires either. The whole story may be told by assumptions. It's a combination of factors, right? Which makes fixed categories a problem. Honestly, I'm having trouble putting my finger on it. Like, what is it that's really at the core of problems with categorization? I think it goes beyond expectations. I think maybe it has to do with fixed beliefs, rigid beliefs. But there's a special kind of rigid belief. Not all beliefs which are rigid are problems. But most problems arise when fixed or rigid beliefs are present, particularly extreme beliefs. When they're fixed, rigid, extreme, unchanging beliefs, as opposed to flexible beliefs that are open to shifting and changing and modification, right? You see how that gives us a little more leverage, a little more freedom, a little more. We can access our creativity a little bit more. And what is it about the belief that makes it so problematic? It goes beyond just fixed, rigid, or extreme beliefs. It's there's something about relying on judgment. Yes. I think it has something to do with judgment, has something to do with negative judgment that restricts progress, that restricts the creative impulse, right? Yeah, there's got to be something about rigidity restricting the creative impulse, even extreme beliefs, and it probably has to do with judgment, right? And it's not just any judgment. It could be positive judgment, but it's not that. It's probably negative judgment. I'm just trying to sort it out. Like, what is it about these rigid, extreme, inflexible beliefs that are so problematic? It surrounds things like negative moral judgment and sort of reliance on unchanging, fixed. I don't think I'm going to be able to put my finger on it right now. I mean, but there is something there. There's something that Mr. Smith is pointing to. And I'm kind of interested in what is it that makes an extreme, rigid belief such a problem? What makes it dysfunctional, particularly as it relates to art, right? Well, no doubt it would naturally be a belief that relates to behavior, and thinking can be thought of as a behavior. But what is it? I think I don't think necessarily that it's wrapped up in negative judgment, because what is an art critique but a combination of negative and positive judgments? I think it might be when those negative and positive judgments get too extreme, and they somehow put guardrails on behavior that are unnecessary. There are some guardrails on behavior as a result of negative judgment, which are important. Like, don't yell fire in a movie theater, right? Those kind of things. Those rules of thumb help help us with long-term value creation, So they're very helpful. And I wouldn't call that necessarily an extreme or even particularly rigid rule of thumb. But it's there, and it's there for a purpose, and it is very helpful. So there's something that's surrounding, like, something that makes these rigid categories a problem, and it might relate to extreme judgments that limit creativity in some way. And that, I think we can all agree, really robs art of its potential. When you do have these extreme judgments that limit creativity, that are rigid, not only is it extreme, not only is it limiting behavior and limiting creativity. By behavior, I mean both thinking and acts, physical acts. But I think I'm beginning to put my finger on what it is about having rigid, extreme categories that are inflexible, influencing behavior, both thought and physical deeds, around the creative space, Yeah, and why that's so problematic. And here's the thing. That kind of thinking is dysfunctional in nearly every realm, right? Every mode of behavior. And it's true in art, it's true in politics, it's true in, you just name it. It's true in sociology, it's true in psychology, it's true in, productivity. It's true because, there's something about, one of the things that helps human beings thrive is our ability. First of all, our sense of humor is really a great resource that we can pull upon. And what is a sense of humor if it isn't just a way to look at the world, a perspective that is flexible, right? Because here's the thing. The map is not the territory. Our mind comes up with a lot of ideas and beliefs, and like throwing spaghetti on the wall. We're looking to see what sticks. And there are some ideas and beliefs that stick. And so we create this map of the world based on that. And if that map is just too rigid, that's not going to work out well, because the world is ever changing, right? The map is not the territory. The territory is ever changing. Imagine being in the territory where we have constant shifts and changes. Like there's a tsunami, and there's a tornado, and a hurricane, and an avalanche, and a mudslide. And if you could just imagine a terrain that is shifting, and we'd have to change our maps pretty frequently, right? And it could be different than geological shifts. It could be political shifts. But human beings, we have to remain nimble on our feet. We do. In order to survive, we have to remain nimble. And anything that constrains our nimbleness, if it isn't necessarily helping us in the long term, it doesn't have utility that we could rely on, certainly at least in the short term, mid term, or long term, if if a rule of thumb begins to lose its utility, then, and it doesn't appear, even conceptually, that it will maintain our certain elevation or status, we need to change those. We need to change that rule. It's true. We're always learning more things about the territory, right? We're getting signals all the time from our senses, from other people. We're getting signals from culture. The world is changing as we move forward. And, the rules of thumb in our map, that needs to change too. And if we're stubborn, we're going to end up walking into a stream when we thought that we were driving our car on the pavement. So yeah, the hardening of the categories. First of all, I love the play on words that Smith talks about. I mean, this is a really fun play on words because, it plays with this idea of heart disease, which for us humans right now is a really big problem. And it's, believe it or not, only getting worse. I mean, Mr. Smith, he died in 1978, the late 70s. Since the late 70s, things have only gotten worse. In fact, not only have they doubled, but they've trebled. They've quadrupled in terms of getting worse as it relates to heart disease, which is pretty funny because I'm pretty sure that Mr. Smith said what he said because of all the, emphasis that was being put on heart disease in the late 70s. Now today, of course, there's just a cacophony of attitudes and ideas surrounding that subject. For a good reason, because it's affecting our health and longevity. And, analogously, in the art space, here's the thing. I cannot report on what's happened since the late 70s in modern culture as it relates to perspectives about art. I just can't say. I wasn't sufficiently aware. I mean, I could look at a book or read a few articles on the internet or reference Wikipedia or something. I might have to do it to get a sense of how art has changed since the late 1970s. So I can't tell you whether we're better off today in, the 2020s than we were back in the 1970s. When it comes to art, I really can't tell you. I know there's been a few movements that have occurred that have been really seismic as it relates to questions of art, questions about propriety. I know people their levels of sensitivities are increasing, political and social sensitivity, and I don't have the perspective yet to know if that's going to lead to an increase or decrease in creativity. And it may lead to a decrease in creativity in some avenues, but not in others. We also have had lots of increases in technology, and that increase in technology has led to more potential in terms of creative expression. I mean, we've had blogs. I mean, we have email. We have video blogs like this one. And there are going to be even more and more ways for people to express themselves. I don't know how old karaoke is, but karaoke, I know it came on the scene and it was really powerful, and a lot of people are enjoying their creative expression through that medium. And, with every new sort of digital technology, there are more and more mediums to explore in terms of artistic expression, or at least they become available to people. Maybe the people who that technology wasn't available before. So I think in some respects we are making progress as a civilization. And I think we also are beginning to understand just how flexible we need to be in terms of categorization. And, how strict we are with our negative judgments, and how limiting relating to our artistic behavior. That's kind of an interesting combination, interesting phrase: artistic behavior and artistic thinking. And it's interesting to think that there may be guardrails on artistic behavior and artistic thinking that I'm not aware of. It's that whole fish in water type scenario where you're surrounded by it, but you don't see it because you see it every day. And so I'd actually be interested in having a time traveler come here from the late 70s to our time and give us a critique about what it thinks about art today. In a way, we can always go back to the late 1970s. Here are us moderns, because we can go back in the form of watching videos or movies at that time, and reading or rereading books that were written about art in that time. So I guess we can go backwards in time. We just can't go forwards, which, interestingly enough, is a problem. Because it's a problem in the physical world too. Not only in the artistic world, but it's a problem in the physical world. Anyway, I just want to say that I'm a little bit uncertain. I just don't know. I don't have that necessarily naive view that things always improve, because things can definitely fall back. In terms, life very much is 2 steps forward, 1 step back. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And there is a ratcheting effect that goes on, because sometimes you just can't unlearn the stuff that you've learned in the past. But of course, we all know that we can unlearn these things. I mean, all it takes is a well-placed hurricane or a tornado, and we could lose all kinds of technology or people if the devastation is great enough. I mean, all it takes is some drought related to climate change, and 90% of human beings are wiped out, and we can lose a lot. We can lose a lot of people, intelligence, creativity, and resources. And we may not be able to fight them back because we can lose things. We definitely can, as a culture, as a civilization. I mean, all it takes is a well-placed meteorite, right? And, we can take losses. And so, it's kind of interesting. Art is really such an interesting subject. It's hard to say. It's sometimes hard to make a judgment about art, because we're sort of in the thick of things, right? We're in the thick of things. And there's so much going down, especially now. I remember when it was a novelty to have 24/7 news available on the TV channel. I remember when CNN first became available. It was like, wow. A lot of the time, as I was growing up, news was available through the newspaper, which came out every day, and every morning. And I guess, of course, there were also afternoon and maybe even evening newspaper versions, but it was sporadic. And that was true also for the news on television. We had the anchors show up in the evenings, prime time, at like 7 p.m. or 6 p.m. or whatever, and tell us the news. And then when the news was over, there was no more news. All the news was gone. Unless you listen to the radio, I suppose. I guess radio was probably sort of the first way that we could get information 24/7 about a certain event that happened that was happening in the world. But I mean, this ready access to information in its ever-changing forms, this 24/7 access really didn't quite exist until, I don't know when CNN came on but there were other things that also sort of blew everybody away through, like cable television was a good example. Then we'd have like MTV showed up with music videos 24 hours a day. I mean, that was pretty phenomenal stuff. Yeah, and now of course the press of information has gotten even more severe, and there's really no limit to the information that we could possibly retrieve. Now, I was about to say the word absorb. There's definitely a limit to the information we can absorb. I think I'm better at absorbing and integrating lots of information today than I was 20, 30, even 40 years ago. Definitely better. But just because I've sort of gotten into the habit of it being around all the time. Now, I'm not saying that that's necessarily good for mental health. Indeed, like from a psychological perspective, there are a lot of people that sort of traumatize themselves through just the repetitive viewing or watching or listening or reading of certain things. I mean, there's something about video that's just so compelling that that our nervous system is so geared toward wanting to have that kind of input. I mean, people scroll at nighttime before they go to bed, and they may doom scroll for an hour. They may have to consciously force themselves to stop doom scrolling so that they can fall asleep. And people may wake up, and the first thing they do in the morning is reach over and grab their smartphone to begin their doom scrolling again. So I'm not necessarily, I really don't think that it's necessarily good for mental health. It sort of depends on, one's perspective, one's situation, one's environment, certainly, and the information that one chooses to scroll. In the end, we are all our guardians. I am the guardian of my own mind. And it is a solemn responsibility to guard against information that that I'm just not ready to accept, or it goes beyond that. It's there's a point at which information is dysfunctional. Information receipt, information inflow is dysfunctional. Yeah. And it has to do with people and their values. When people's lives, like everyday lives, get compromised in some way. Who knows how they may get compromised? But I mean, if I'm watching YouTube and not brushing my teeth, that could be a problem, particularly if I value health. And if my choices are preventing me from brushing my teeth, then there could be some very serious long-term consequences. So in that respect, it can be a challenge. If I sit down a lot in a chair, that could be a real challenge too. So I think I'm getting a little bit off topic. I just want to, first of all, just thank Mr. Smith for his funny joke. Hardening of the categories causes art disease. And, thank you for that levity, Mr. Smith. I really appreciate it. In a way, he's sort of not only expressing a problem, but he's solving the problem in the very same stroke. Humor, as I brought out earlier, is a really great antidote to excessive rigidity. And I think this is probably why this quote stands out like it does, because indirectly it tells you, it shows you the solution, and that is to maintain your sense of humor and your friendly disposition and your flexible disposition, so that you don't necessarily get thrown through your extreme judgments about one thing or another. And well played, Mr. Smith. Not only did you identify a problem, but you provided the solution in one short sentence. And you know, I look at some of the past art quotations that I've explored, and they're trying to say the same thing. Actually, some of them are trying to say the same thing. Like, I remember there was one particular quoting it was defining what high art was. In fact, there are a lot of folks who are defining what high art was. And these are people who lived, by the way, in the 19th and 18th centuries. You know, it's kind of, what's interesting here is that Smith is definitely taking a modern perspective. Whereas some of the quotes that I was examining in prior episodes of this video blog, they were definitely prescribing the difference between high art and low art. And that kind of thing, like I was mentioning earlier, definitely inhibits creative action, creative behavior. And I'm talking about physical art producing behavior and thinking behavior. So yeah, I could see how that could be limiting and could be a problem long term. It could definitely be fatal for art if people exercise those particular highly rigid, extreme, and inflexible attitudes that affected their behavior and limited their creativity. You know, one of the wonderful features of the human mind is creativity. You know, the ability to integrate. Really, it is the ability to integrate concepts and to join them, to find analogies, to use similes, metaphors to help us understand the world. And, you know, a lot of that integration provides a lot of progress. It helps us move forward, sometimes slowly, sometimes more slowly than we'd like, but sometimes very rapidly. In fact, so rapidly that, like in a Thomas Kuhn kind of way, just the whole framework gets shifted and changed. I mean, that happened with, you know, quantum mechanics coming on the scene and its influence. I mean, today, it's really influencing a lot of areas. And, you know, in fact, I was thinking earlier today about fractals and the Mandelbrot set. I was thinking about that mostly yesterday. I remember when James Gleick came out with his book, Chaos. I was very interested in that book when it first came out. That was really neat stuff. The butterfly effect and all those cultural concepts came out. I don't know, was that the late 90s? Maybe, actually, I think it was the late 80s. Yeah, those are the good old days. But, you know, we made some progress way back then. That was like 40 years ago, friend. And, you know, it's part of being nimble-footed. Nimble as it relates to math, nimble as it relates to art, nimble as it relates to literature, music. So anyway, I think I'm done with this particular quote. Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. I appreciate the lesson there and helping me to understand really what it is about hardening categories or inflexibility that's a problem. Because like I was mentioning earlier, the sheer method of labeling all by itself in a vacuum is not that interesting, and it's sort of like putting a new word in the dictionary. You know, we can put 100,000 words in a dictionary, and actually that's great. That actually helps the thinking process along. It helps creativity along. So what's the problem with that? It's there's and it's less, like I was mentioning earlier, less to do with fixing those categories. It's about the judgments behind them and their influences on behavior, their limiting influences on behavior. Anyway, I hope you have a wonderful day. Talk to you later. Bye bye.